The Israelites, the people that God led out of Egypt, they had some difficulties following the directions that God gave them. And they found themselves in trouble. And this word that Isaiah gives to them is a word to let them know that yes, you're in trouble. Yes, you will go through some things. You will find yourself suffering the consequences of your actions. But I will still be with you and I will deliver you. And there is an end even to the wrath that might be brought against you because you're mine. The Lord chastens those who he loves. And the Lord has to give us words of correction. And I will tell you that over a lifetime, I've often said this. I've said it in Bible studies. I've said it in sermons. And I continue to say that if you are a parent and you raise a child that you never chastise or correct, you will ultimately raise a child that you yourself will not be able to stand as that child gets older. If you don't provide correction, ultimately you will find out that you will actually hate to see your child coming. And so you must raise them while the season is right. And we must take a cue straight from God, and that is, there comes a time where even though you may not be popular, there are things that have to be said and done in order to raise them properly. You know, some years ago there was some controversy over this ideology of the tiger mom. If you remember, there was an Asian woman who said that she was tough on her children and that she made them get their lessons, she made them study music, she was really on them all the time. There were a lot of people who disagreed with her. They said the children needed to be given, you know, the latitude to go and play and to do things on their own and to make up their own minds and all of that kind of thing. Well, recently they revisited the tiger mom, and now that her children are grown, they interview now her children to find out whether or not they have any psychological damage or to find out if they grew up to hate their mother. Actually, on the contrary, they love their mother, and they said that if they have children, they will raise their children just as their mother did. Both of them are graduates from Harvard. Both of them are graduates from Harvard. One of them is a very high-ranking military official, a colonel or something like that, because she not only went to Harvard, she did this as well. We're talking about very successful women, and she didn't let up on them. I will say to you today that this is a foolishness to allow a child to go forward with a mind of its own.
Yeah, really.
It is foolishness to allow a child to be an independent thinker. Your independence comes when you become an adult.
Right.
And when you become an adult, I should have taken the time to make sure that you have sense enough to think like me. I won't have to tell you what to do once you become an adult, because I will continue to tell you what to do when you're a child, and when you become an adult, then you'll do what I've already put in you. And so I'm saying that to you as I start off this morning, because it is important that you as parents, you as grandparents begin to take back the authority that we have in the life of our children. I believe that oftentimes we have given up on our children, and we need to go back to that, as they used to say in the church, that old landmark whereby we are raising our children. I know that the economic system whereby we're in work, so many times we're at work and children are coming home to unlock doors by themselves and to home alone and so on and so forth. But no matter what you do, when you get home, you need to check some things.
Yes.
If you have to work, you need to invest in some things. You know, they got a camera now. We have them in this church. They got a camera that you can see from here. If you travel all the way to Paris, you can pull up your iPhone and look and see what's going on.
Yeah.
And I would tell you this whole idea of, oh, well, the children ought to have their privacy. There's no privacy in my house. There ain't privacy. There's no such thing as privacy. You know, children don't have shut doors and locked doors. Children do what you tell them to do. And you should be spying on them and checking on them. And so you don't give up on your children. Make sure that you just like God is saying to us through this text, there are consequences to wrong action.
That's right.
But I will always love you enough to bring you back
Hallelujah.
to where you need to be.
Amen.
And so as we look at chapter 62, we find here that he says, for Zion's sake, for you, this is what I'm going to do for you. You don't ever have to give up. Here's how not to give up. Because God says, hey, this is what I'm doing for you. Let me tell you the first thing that he's doing for you. God is working for you.
Yes.
You need to know that God is working for you. If you look at verse 1, it says, for your sake will I not hold my peace, and for Jerusalem's sake I will not rest. He won't rest. He won't stop. God is working for you, and God doesn't take an off day on you. Now, some other folk can take an off day on you. That's the people who don't believe in the way that you do things, and they think you're going to fail. God says, I think you're going to succeed.
Praise the Lord.
I'm going to continue to work on your behalf, and I'm going to continue. All you got to do is be mine, and because you're mine, I'm going to always reach back and pull you back up when you fall down. Because you're mine, I'm always going to protect you. I'm going to do for you. There are going to be consequences. I'm not going to blindly love you. I'm not going to love you without any consequences.
That's right.
But I will love you because I want you to be the best you.
Yes.
And so this is one of the things that we ought to be excited about, even with each other. This whole idea of somebody says something to you that you feel is negative, and then you get bothered by it. You get bothered because somebody tells you something or gives you some criticism. You know, criticism helps you to get better if you know how to take it.
That's right.
Now, I know some people who say, well, I need, Sister Rose Fuss, they'll tell you, I need positive criticism. See, the thing is, when you are the one being criticized, you don't get to choose the criticism. What you get to choose is what you do about it.
That's
See,
right.
sometimes you may determine that some critic gave you the wrong criticism. Maybe in your mind you say, well, you know, they're not right. But even still, it's worth considering why they even perceived that there was something wrong with you. Oh, I wish I could catch somebody. See, if you would begin to believe and understand that all that you do is not perfect and you're not all that in a bag of chips, when you begin to realize that, then you will recognize that everything that somebody says about you is their perception of you.
Yes.
And so the question is, why is that their perception?
Yes.
What is it that I can do better in order to correct the things that I do? Anybody that knows me for a period of years knows that I'm always trying to get better. Now, I will say this. I'm not the kind of person that will tell you what your criticism ought to be. But I am the kind of person that will check your credentials.
All right.
I will check your credentials. So to come to me with a criticism and you're not qualified for that criticism, you may ought watch yourself.
Come on now.
Because I might give you some criticism back.
Amen.
But when somebody comes and they say, look, here is an issue, I've always looked at that issue. Think about it. Since I've been the pastor of this church, we've always surveyed this church. Almost every year we've surveyed. Sometimes we survey 2 or 3 times a year. Why? Because I want to know, what are we doing that we can get better at? What are we doing that maybe we failed in that we can get better at? I always want to know, how can we do better at what we do? You know, great preachers will not be made. Great entrepreneurs will not be made. Great ushers, great choir members, great musicians, if there's never any kind of criticism, if there's never any kind of feedback. And so sometimes you need that feedback, and you need somebody who's working on your behalf enough to not just love you, but to also tell you when you're wrong.
Amen.
And to tell you when you need to check something. Then look at this. I'm going to show you something. Verse 2 says this. So God is always working for us. He's always shedding the light for us. There's a lamp that burns for us. He's illuminating life for us, giving us that feedback. But then it says, and the Gentiles shall see the righteousness, and all kings thy glory, and thou shalt be called by a new name, which the Lord or which the mouth of the Lord shall name. You need to also know that you have a new name. You have a new name. Your name means a lot. One of the things that they often talked about in biblical times, they would talk about a name, and they were specifically talking about a bride. And the fact that a bride would take on her groom's name. She would take on the husband's name. And you see that in this text, this whole idea of bride and groom. And one of the reasons that she would take on the husband's name is because in those ancient times, women did not necessarily control money and things like that, but they still had to go into the marketplace. And so if she went into the marketplace and she had to purchase something or she had to get something, and it needed to go on the account, so to speak, all that needed to be known is her name.
That's right.
See, because if you were trying to figure out what is going to happen with her or to her, the first thing you wanted to know is her name. See, you got to realize that there are some men that don't take care of their house.
All right.
But then there are other men that you better well know whose wife you're messing with. And so you better find out who she got a name hooked to, because that man might hurt you real bad. And so the question becomes, whose wife is this? Whose name do you carry? Because maybe I need to be careful. Let me share something with you. Now, I know that the South gets a bad name. The South gets a bad rap for racism and all those kind of things, and they often say, you know, black folks aren't safe in the South and so on and so forth. But I got news for you. In Hurdle Mills, North Carolina, which still has a dividing line, where my father grew up and where my grandparents raised 10 children and so on and so forth, it can still be a brutal environment. But I tell you, even as recent as a few years ago, as I went to visit some aunts and uncles, I stopped by the store. And the store has a counter in it, and at the counter they serve, you know, breakfast and soup, you know, the chili and the grilled cheese sandwich and all of that. And so I sat down, Brother Robin, to have a meal, and you know, at the family reunion, you know that somebody is going to ask you who you belong to. They do that in order to identify you and to realize the history that is in the family. But what is still shocking to me is the fact that when you go into a restaurant in some places in the South, even the white people ask you, who are you? Now what that is to say is, do you belong here? Yeah. Well, what that is to say is, whose name do you go by and who can vouch for and speak for you? And so I will tell them that I am Troy Shaw and that my grandfather is Alexander Shaw. And when I say Alexander Shaw, even the white folks in town say, oh, that's that 200-acre farm over there off Jim Morton Road. It is because of the name that they know that when I come in and I'm going to eat, you better not bother that boy, because there's a big family that you don't want to mess with.
Hallelujah.
So if you realize that man knows your name, what do you think when you pronounce to the world that your name is the name that is called after him who created the world, who redeemed us all, he who created his Savior, the Son Jesus, that came down in a human fleshly body, gave up the ghost, but then came again. So what does that mean to the world and to Satan and to all of his imps? It is to say that I belong to the one who has defeated death. I belong to the one who's been to hell and came back to hell. I belong to the one who has victory. I've got a new name. I'm not called by the same thing that I've been called by before. God is calling you to a new purpose, a new name. He has purposed you and gifted you with so much better than you could ask or think. All of the stuff that you've been doing, you need to rearrange your thinking because you have a new name. Sister Wesley, last night, I didn't sleep so well. I had a lot of work to do. I had some things that I needed to finish up. I was finishing up some things, and finally, when I went to bed, you know how sometimes you get to bed and your mind is still kind of moving, and so my mind was moving. I wanted it to stop, and I just kind of wanted to put it on something else. And so what I did, Sister Latanya, you would appreciate this, is I turned on the television. And when I turned on the television, one of my favorite shows that comes on Saturday night, and when I can't sleep, I'll turn this show on. It only comes on probably about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. It is a home show, and these realtors are selling these big homes and these mansions. And last night they had some beautiful mansions on there. And so I'm looking at those mansions, and I'm looking at the way that the realtors are trying to sell them, and they're talking about them and so on and so forth. And I'm just looking, I'm thinking, boy, those are some nice homes. But the fact is, when they put these nice homes on this show, some people have moved. Other people are supposed to be moving in. That's why they're selling the home, $7 million home. Right. Somebody moved, somebody else supposed to be moving in. Right. And so they were taking us through the tour of the house and telling us how we could purchase that house. And it's a shame, but this is what came to my mind. What I started thinking about is I started thinking to myself as I was watching a sermon that I preached not too long ago, probably maybe about 10 years ago here at this church. And I was thinking to myself, I said, I wonder, would God let any of his people have a house like that if they still got the mentality whereby their kids are pouring Kool-Aid all over the carpet? I don't see no Kool-Aid on the carpet. I wonder if God gonna give us some houses like that if we still got children swinging off of the cabinets and breaking the doors off. I was saying to myself, now look at them showing these houses. I wonder if God gonna give us a house like that when dirty clothes are piled up under the bed, on the bed, in the chair, around the chair, on the TV. I said, I wonder if God gonna give us a house like that if we're opening up windows and breaking out screens. That's a wonder. I wonder, does God give you a house like that when you got to put up a bed sheet as the curtain? See, my point as I was watching that is I was thinking that before God blesses us with things like that, we need to change the mentality that we have. Why are we still living like we're crazy? We need to clean up and straighten up and get ready for God to give us a blessing, because he's not going to give you a mansion with Kool-Aid all over the floor.
Hallelujah. Woo. That's right.
Man.
Nope.
You got a new name. You're not like that no more. You don't have to live like that no more.
That's right.
You're not destitute anymore.
That's right.
You can live.
That's right.
Open your heart, your mind, your purpose, and say, God, here I am. I'm ready to live. Your name has changed. You don't have to act like you used to act. You don't have to hoard like you used to hoard. You don't have to go out and get drunk just so you can feel better. No, you don't have to do that anymore. You got a new name.
That's right. That's right.
I wish Kelly don't have to go out and get drunk. If she's not feeling good, I would hope she call her husband. And so if we're going through some things, but we got a new name and we call after him who has all, then why are we out trying to get messed up and so on and so forth like we don't have a Savior? And so you've been called by a new name. Your actions, your behaviors, all of that has to change in order for you to line up and truly fit into the family. Mother and I know that there's a family secret. It's not much of a secret anymore because most of the people are dead, so we can tell it now.
All right.
But my grandparents, anybody that ever knew them, they seemed opposite. They really did. My grandmother, it seemed like she came off the hill. And the people that live on the hill, those are people with money. And my grandfather, he seemed like he might have came from the valley. He didn't seem like he came from the hill. He didn't seem. But the fact was they actually came from just the opposite. Yep. My grandmother came from the valley. Her family wasn't very affluent and so on and so forth. But my grandfather came from the hill. He actually did live on the hill, Dunsinane Hill. And so his family, they had money. They served, he would talk about dinner. They served dinner on china. One of the reasons that I eat with a knife and fork today is because my grandfather wouldn't have it any other way. He would have a heart attack if he saw a piece of bread on the table. Oh, you don't put bread on the table. It has to go on a plate. And you got to have forks and knives and dishes and all that kind of stuff. He was really particular about that. But the funny part is, he was the black sheep of their family. He was the black sheep of their family. They mostly kept him in the garage. And they let him tinker with engines and things like that while they were doing other things in the house. His sister, my aunt, very affluent kind of woman and school teacher, educator, those kind of things. And so, you know, they had the same last names. But because my grandfather was unwilling to conform, he stayed where he didn't have to stay, and he did what he wouldn't have to do because he decided not to conform to the name that he was given. So now I'll let you in on the other part of the secret. His mother had married again. And one of the reasons that, you know, they were living like they were living is because she took on another name. But he refused to conform to the name that mother took on.
That's right.
Your name has changed. And you have an opportunity to do some great things. It is your choice whether to stay in the garage or come in the house. There's some china in the house. There's good dishes in the house. There's some money in the house. There's an opportunity for education in the house. So why are you still in the garage?
Come on now. All right. Don't like how preach.
The Lord has lined us up with a newness and a greatness and a freshness. So why are we still trying to live as if we're something else? You don't believe me? I've got some friends. I actually did grow up on the other side of the tracks.
Yep.
What separated the high school that Sister Mara and I, we went to high school at the same high school. But what separated us, or what separated me, from the other half of the people that we went to high school with was a railroad track. On my side of the tracks, things was rough. On their side of the tracks, they had lawyers and they had politically astute people. There were all kinds of people on that side. And so what I did, Sister Featherston, is I went to school. And I realized in my freshman and my sophomore year in high school, I realized that many of the people who I grew up with in my same neighborhood, somehow or another between the bus and school, they didn't make it. And so I was at school. My mom and daddy wouldn't have it no other way. I was at school. But there were a whole lot of folks from my neighborhood didn't go to school. They just didn't go. They just started dropping out. They didn't go. They had other stuff to do. And when they did come to school, nobody wanted them to school because they were acting crazy. Me, on the other hand, when I got to school, I didn't tell them where I came from. I got off the bus. And I looked around and I figured out which crowd I wanted to hang with. I hung with the crowd from the other side of the tracks. And I heard them talking about college and schools and money and all these kinds of things. And so when they talk about it, I talk about it too. When they would go to one of the meetings, I'd go to a meeting too. And so they had Kiwanis Club. Did nobody from my neighborhood join that stuff? I did. They had student government. I did. They turned around and said, well, we got the Fellowship of Christians. I joined. Because when I looked around, I saw it. And sometimes they would even ask me, say, you need a ride? Yeah, I need a little ride. You know, my mom at work, whatever, I need a ride. And so I was riding around in their Mercedes and Cadillacs and everything else. Hey, I'll ride with them.
Really?
But then I knew some people from their neighborhood that would make me shake my head because I couldn't understand it. Because what they were doing is they were trying to act like they came from my neighborhood. Yeah. And I would just shake my head. Why in the world would you act like you came from my neighborhood when you living like you living?
Really?
Because of their mentality and because of the way that they assimilated and lived, Brother Crowder, today, they're no longer acting like they come from my neighborhood. They're in my neighborhood.
Right.
Oh, wow.
When you have a different calling and a different name, don't act like your surroundings. Act and become who God has called you to be.
Hallelujah.
I am still Troy Shaw, no matter where I live. I still realize where I came from, even when I'm living in a mess. that I can still eat with some decent china and a fork and a knife.
That's right.
Get all of them, Bob.
And so all of us have the opportunity to be called after, to live after, and to be better. So look at this. Look at verse 3. Here's the key. Thou shalt also be a crown of glory in the hand of the Lord, and a royal diadem in the hand of thy God. The main thing is to stay in the Lord's hand. No matter where you go, stay in the Lord's hand. No matter where you go, stay in contact. I have never, everybody's family, you got somebody in your family you don't get along with.
Well, yeah.
I promise you somebody in your family you don't get along with. And if it's somebody, if everybody getting along, that means there's either not many people in your family or you're in denial. But usually there's somebody in our family that we don't get along with so well. I got people in my family that I don't necessarily like to be around too much on either side. But I tell you this, you talk about farm and so on and so forth, and I'm in no way an opportunist, but I tell you what, I'm not foolish. I know who's in charge. When my grandmother was alive, I called her. I talked to her. And there was a time when I felt like I wanted to get away and I wanted a place to stay. She said, here's where you go. She gave me a place to stay. Talk to my grandma. That's all I needed to do, talk to my grandma. I stayed in contact with her because I realized not only is she my grandmother, but she is also the queen that is in charge of everything that is known in those 200 acres.
Right.
When my grandmother died, I had 9 aunts and uncles who thought they were in charge. But I knew who was in charge because I was in connection with the queen. And she had already told me what was going to happen when she left. But she told me, she said, all your stuff is all taken care of.